Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and this is the Steiner Optics R1X Red Dot. Steiner isn't a new name in optics. They've been making optics for quite some time, but they're more known for their variable magnification optics than I'd say they are for their red dots. The R1X is a very purpose-built optic that when I initially saw it, I just thought it was just another run-of-the-mill 2 MOA red dot, had its own unique features, its own unique flare or style, and that was it. Obviously, the first thing you notice when you take a close look at it is it's definitely not that. The R1X was built specifically for the AR platform. You could obviously use it on other rifles, but it had the AR in mind. And what's more than that, it was built with CQB shooting in mind, if you want to use that acronym. Being that on your 50-200 meter zero, one of the more popular zeros that are out there, there are some holdover issues, especially at close ranges. If you practice a lot and you shoot a lot, these holdovers aren't that big of a deal. It's very easy to memorize relative to the size of your target or your desired point of impact, how far you have to hold over given how far away you are from the target. It does take some really good practice to become intuitive at it, because knowing your holdover at 5 meters when you know you're 5 meters knowing you're 5 meters away is a lot different than knowing your holdover at 7 meters when you're not quite sure if you're 7, 8, 10, or 6 meters away from your threat. The differences can be small or they can be quite grievous depending on the circumstances in which you have to make a shot like that. The R1X operates just like a traditional red dot sight. I've got a 2 MOA point of aim. But one thing I can do if I need to is I can go into the options mode, hit the button, and now I have a 3-dot stadia that give me a 5, a 7, and a 10 meter point of aim. They're all 4 MOA in relation to the main optic dot's 2 MOA size. So now if I know I'm in that 5 meter or 7 meter or 10 meter envelope, I have a point of aim, point of impact dot that I can use, and all I have to do is set myself up for it by hitting one button. The review process, I zeroed 2 different times. I zeroed on 55 grain, I also zeroed on 77 grain to cover both ends of the spectrum. My target ammo is generally 55 grain, but most of my rifles are zeroed on 75 or 77, depending on what that gun's purpose is. I wanted to check the point of aim, point of impact variances on not only the 2 MOA dot, but also that 3-dot stadia, that CQB 3-dot option that I have at 5, 7, or 10 meters. Now I say meters, I mean meters. It is 5,200 meter zero, which will give you a 5, 7, or 10 meter impact with the optional additional reticle activated. Of course, I had to check that. I wanted to make sure that that's what I was going to get. So what we're going to look at now is a series of shot groups taken at 5, 7, and 10 meters. The first group will be what my actual point of impact would have been had I been holding on my desired point of aim, and then using the adjustment reticle to get the hits that I should get from those distances. That's certainly proof of concept. That's certainly proof that the optic does what it's supposed to do. You know, that first group I held directly on where I wanted my rounds to hit instead of holding over like I should have at that distance. And then I shot it with the 5 meter point of aim, the 7 meter point of aim, the 10 meter point of aim, and it was more or less point of aim, point of impact at those distances. Of course, the question can be asked, how much does that really matter? If you've got time to practice, then you shouldn't have an issue holding over. You get that intuitive idea how far distances are, especially if you practice a lot on the same kind of targets you might actually have to shoot. I use almost exclusively human form targets because I'm very self-defense focused. So that's kind of how I intuitively know what my holdover is in relation to the general human anatomy that I'm going to be aiming at. But if you're someone who just doesn't have a lot of time or the money or the ability to practice that much, then holdovers might not be something that's as intuitively ingrained in you as someone who does have the opportunity or can afford to shoot much more. We talk about accuracy. There's no one definition. I consider there to be a practical accuracy and then a precision accuracy. Practical accuracy is hits to a critical region of the body. Precision accuracy is hits specifically to areas of the body most likely to lead to penetration to very critical regions of the body. So we talk about the human form, we can have practical or precision accuracy. I consider thoracic, any hits in the really good thoracic cavity to be practical accuracy, any hits in the head region, the cranial vault region, to be precision accuracy. There's areas in both areas of the body that are more, how should I put this, more susceptible to trauma from gunfire than others. So if we're talking about the head as a precision point of aim, because the head, relatively speaking, is always going to be smaller than the thoracic cavity. Now, it doesn't change relative size in relation to the presentation of the body to you, but its margin of errors are larger on the left and the right above it than, say, the thoracic cavity. So the larger point of aim. But inside the head, and again, this is not going to be 100% anatomically correct, but it's going to be a pretty close representation because I practiced drawing this quite a bit, usually demo it in classes. So inside the brain, we have the brain stem, which is made up of the pons, midbrain, and medulla oblongata. You guys have heard me talk about this before. That is the only off switch in the human body. I need to put a bullet there. It needs to penetrate and destroy those structures in order to induce flaccid paralysis and turn someone off. Complete total body relaxation, no final actions. That's the off switch, the only off switch. My margin of error is the brain mass itself. So generally when we talk about a human being from the front, we want to shoot above the jawline. Nose is a good point of reference. Just behind, above the ear, from the side, from the back, where the spine meets the head. Not getting too specific into that. So my margin of error here is pretty small. If I throw around too far to the bottom, I may penetrate deep enough, especially when we're talking about a rifle optic. I may penetrate back there and hit that spinal column, penetrate the spinal column, sever the spinal cord, which would be awesome. That's a lottery win right there. But I can't necessarily count on it, and it's hard to visually reference the spine, whereas the nose, the ear from the side, back of the head, they can reference, tell me how to get to this brain structure inside the cranial vault. That's my point of aim. Now when it comes to the thoracic cavity, I have a wider margin of error. But roughly speaking, we're looking for the heart. Again, not 100% anatomically correct. Not even close. Rough representation. We've got some arteries run midline down the body. And we've got our lungs, and again, it's very hard to take a three-dimensional object and make it two-dimensional, as I'm trying to do with this drawing. But generally speaking, the closer to the center, the closer to the heart, the closer to these arteries in this area, pulmonary arteries, pulmonary than the veins coming off the sides, the closer I get in this area, the better off I'm going to be. Not holding over correctly because of that mechanical offset we have inherent with zeros, all zeros have it, can determine whether or not I get a great hit, an okay hit, or a not so great hit. And again, we are talking about a rifle. One advantage of a rifle over a handgun, we're talking about a rifle optic, is the fact that it has that it has the ability to introduce that temporary wound cavity in the body if the muzzle velocity is sufficient enough to do that. So even if I don't necessarily hit the heart, I may come close enough to the heart for that temporary cavity, that kinetic, that shock trauma, whatever you want to call it, to actually cause damage to that structure. But I can't count on that. Can't count on a lot of things. So I want to put my rounds specifically where I want them to go instead of just getting close enough and hoping it does the job. If my holdovers aren't practiced enough, I can throw around too low, or if I overcompensate too high to hit exactly where I want to hit when we're talking about that precision accuracy. The R1X optic is designed with that precision accuracy at close distance in mind. So what I'll do with my buddy here is I'll just go ahead and demonstrate a bad holdover, and then what my holdover, what I would have gotten rather, using the R1X's Stadia optic to actually get my desired point of impact. Now I don't know exactly how far I am away. If I had to guess, I'd say I'm in the 5 meter distance. So I'll go ahead and choose the head because I'm super close range. Maybe my threat's not moving around. Maybe I just have it available based on the context of the situation. But instead of holding over like I should, maybe I forget, stress of the moment, what have you, I'll go ahead and put my dot exactly where I want my bullet to hit. It's definitely low. I can see it from here, but let's walk up there and take a look. This is certainly not ideal. It's still a good hit. Center of the head, as the head was presented to me, so it could have gone back there and severed that spinal, or damaged the spinal column, severed the spinal cord, give me that lottery win. Or it could have impacted significantly enough on enamel, and then the bone structure there protecting the spinal cord to deflect the round significantly enough to prevent me from getting my incapacitating hit. Now, if you get shot in the mouth, chances are you're probably going to be like, you know what, okay, this is the wrong house to break into. But we can't, again, presuppose that. We can't depend on that psychological incapacitation. Is this still a good shot? Absolutely. But it isn't where I wanted my bullet to go. And if I forget to hold over, I'm going to hit, depending on distance and depending on what your chosen zero is, I'm probably going to hit lower than I would like to. and that's a problem. So I'll go ahead and shoot it again using the built-in holdover dot. Now I'll push a 1 button, steady optic is up, and let's check our work. So that was our first round. My point of aim was roughly right there. That was just not holding over. Now, using the holdover optic option, my round went right where I wanted it to, into that nasal cavity. The nasal cavity, the T-zone, if you will, represents the easiest path a bullet can take to enter this cranial structure. There's not a lot of bone mass, cartilage, and so on in the way of the round. So if I want the bullet to take the path of least resistance, eyes, nose, that region offers the least amount of resistance. This is precision accuracy. I would consider this round to be practical accuracy. It's still a really good hit into the cranial region of the body, but it's not necessarily doesn't offer the same chances, relatively speaking, of incapacitation, immediate incapacitation, as this round did. If this would have been where my point of aim, point of impact was, using that offset optic option that I have, that had it penetrated deep enough in the skull, and all rights it would have, because it's taking the path of least resistance into the skull, that would have been an incapacitating hit, induced flaccid paralysis. Fight would have been stopped with 1 round. Probably would have fired more than 1, depending on how fast my threat disappeared, because depending on 1 round is kind of a fool's errand. But that just demonstrates the effectiveness of the optic. That's not a great distance, but if you place that distance in certain places, you can see how it can affect your ability to get exactly what you want. And that's where I think that the R1X definitely shines. Is this the optic for everybody? I think the answer to that is no. If you already have that intuitive skill set, you understand your bright line distances in relation to what you're used to shooting at, this might not be something for you. If you're already running an MRO or an aim point micro or something high quality like that, there's no reason to change. But if you're new to rifles, you're buying your first rifle, or you just don't have the time because lifestyles, budgets, and everything are going to be different, or maybe you live in a place where you can't practice as often as you like, or as realistically as you'd like, such as, you know, a very urban area where you have an indoor range and they have really draconian rules on what you're allowed to do while you're in the range. Maybe you got to sit down to shoot your rifle. I've seen ranges like that before. That's a huge hindrance to proper, more realistic training. So an optic like this is a good option for someone who is just not going to dedicate the time, or can't dedicate the time they might necessarily need to get the work in, to get that intuitive holdover, to know when they're supposed to adjust based on those distances. Anybody who's been shooting a red dot, honestly, for quite a while already has it down if they've been doing things correctly, and something like this may seem a little bit silly to you, but consider that it's an option that's great to have, even if you don't necessarily always use it. I'm sure Steiner had law enforcement, military in mind with the development of this optic, and it's something I could definitely see being beneficial, especially for your SWAT team situations where you could have a barricaded suspect, where until your sniper element gets in place, like you literally have one of your assaulters, he's the de facto precision rifleman, he's the go man, until a sniper section gets deployed, gets glass on target. He may need, or may be able to beneficially use that optic, get a more knowledgeable distance, a more knowledgeable point of aim, versus holding over. And especially if he's in a compromised position where he can't actually bag the gun in or set in across something to stabilize the gun. This is something that would be beneficial for that situation, because then you're floating holdover as you're on that rifle and fatigue starts to set in. Instead of worrying about your floating holdover, now you can just hit that 1 button, turn on your 3 stadia, say, you know, I'm roughly about 7 meters away, let me go ahead and hold for that, and if I have to, I can get my hit. And I think that's very beneficial versus what I explained, trying to use an RDS in a very precision role. This gives you your regular optic when you want it. Those of you who've used EOTech, the window, you're going to find it very familiar. It's a very large, very forgiving field of view, which is awesome. And then you have the option of hitting 1 button and giving yourself those close quarter range holdovers. So in that regard, I think that the optic is definitely well placed. It's a great option. I'm glad it's an option that's on the market. And like I said, for those of you who just aren't going to have the time, this may be something worth looking at. Throughout the review process, I didn't experience any problems with the optic at all. It worked the way it's supposed to work. It's very user-friendly, very programmable. I'd say if there's one thing I didn't like about it, it's the fact that the proprietary footprint, so nobody's really making aftermarket mounts for it. The mount that comes with it's okay, but I would like to see something maybe to get it a little higher. I mean, it gives you 2 riser height options in the box, but I'd like to be able to bump it up closer to that lower 1/3 height, because I do feel even with the large riser underneath it, it does sit a little bit lower than I would like. But other than that, I didn't have any real significant complaints. It is a little strange. It is powered by two 2032s versus another battery power source. That is a little strange for a rifle optic. But again, it's not the huge deal, and those provide plenty of energy, plenty of battery life, and that there's two of them. I don't think you're going to have any battery concerns long term like you would if it had gone with like a AA or something like that. But those are really my only complaints is the riser height, and I do find it a little strange that they powered it by 2032s, but that's not a huge issue in the grand scheme of things, especially if it's not going to be a work optics, more of a home defense kind of optic. You can check out more on Steiner.com. It's available through Kinsey's Optics. You can use the code Cowan5 at checkout to save 5% if you're interested in buying this or anything else they have on the store. I'm Aaron Cowan with Sage Dynamics. Trading accordingly.